So today we're going to talk about debugging Node.js applications. We're going to use a couple different tools here and show you some options and ways that you can do it. Hopefully this expresses some different things that you can do that maybe you didn't know before. So we'll check this out today. But I wanted to start off with talking about a little story. A long time ago, with an urban legend of a big power outage that happened in the United States in the early 1900s. So what did they do? They called up who the most impressive person was in the technology at the time, because all these homes were without power, tens and thousands of homes. So Thomas Edison walks in, right? Just dial him up, bring him on in. They have him come look at the situation, and he says, "Oh, I know what to do." And they say, "Oh, so great, thank you so much. It was a big problem." He says, "Okay," and he presses a button, and all the power just comes back on. And they're like, "That's amazing, thank you so much. You know, how much do we have to pay you for this service?" He says, "Let me write up an invoice for you." And he writes down an invoice, hands it to the person, and they say, well wait a minute, this is $10,000. That's a lot for pressing a button. He says, "Yeah, hold on a second, let me revise that invoice." He crosses it out and tries it again, hands it back, and it says, $1 for pressing the button, $9,999 for knowing which button to press. And that's the key, because learning how to code and learning how to debug and doing everything we do, it's not about pressing a button. It's about knowing which button to press. Once you know something, it's easy. We hear it's easy all the time from people who've already struggled through weeks of figuring out how to do something. And then once you know it, oh, it's easy. What's wrong with you, right? It's like we forget what it was like not to know. That's called the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is once you know how to do it, it's easy. And that's what I want to show you today is once you learn how to use a few different things inside of VS Code, there is a button you can press that will make life much easier. My name is John Papa, and I work for Microsoft as a developer advocate. I work in the Cloud Azure team, and I'm a JavaScript developer, just like many of you. I love Node.js, and I love tools that make my life easier, and that's what we're going to talk about today. At the end of the day, this is the button you get to press, this big green button inside of VS Code, and it will help you debug any of your Node applications. In some cases, you don't even have to press the button. So we'll see that as well. I like to give out resources at the beginning of my talks and at the ends, so that way you can kind of get them out of the way if you want to. This will show up at the end again, but if you want to take a quick picture of these to get the links, everything you're going to see today, VS Code, the extensions I'm going to use, a demo that we're going to show in the README file so you can try all the same things I'm doing today on your own, and a tutorial for debugging Angular, if you want to learn how to do that, up on the VS Code website. So I'd like to start off with the most common way to debug Node, console.log. Everybody here who's done Node or JavaScript in any way, you've done this before. You probably still do it. It's easy. It's very easy to do. I need to know what the value of the customer is at this point in time. You console.log it, console table, whatever you're going to use. But it does litter your code. In fact, ESLint has a setting that most of the guidelines show will then detect console logs and throw a warning or an error in your code. So if you have linters on in CI processes, they'll say, hey, you have 48 console logs in your app. And at some point, if you're like me, you probably look up and you're like, wow, how did I add that many and never get rid of them? It happens, right? They're not bad. I still use them. But we all do it. It's okay. My name's John Papa, and yes, I have a problem with console.log. So then you can get a little funky with this. If you're like me, and you like to get around CI systems and ESLint, which says you can't have the word console in your app anywhere, you can do some fun things like this. Just reset console equal to another variable, like captains. And then you can put in log statements like captain's log stardate 4.2, and put out the thing in there. It's fun, and yes, I do this at times, mostly for demos. I wouldn't do this in production, so don't go crazy. But it's fun, right? We have to have fun programming. And there are times for console logs or captain's logs that you can use these things for, but there's other ways. So let's explore some of this. With VS Code, there's some really cool out-of-the-box debugging that you can get. And this is just a glimpse at it through an animated GIF of things that you can do with an Angular app and a Node backend. You can start the debugger, you can set breakpoints, conditional breakpoints can also be set. You can set hit count breakpoints. You can do expressions. You can have column breakpoints or inline breakpoints. They're also known as those. So if you've got like lambdas inside your code or arrow functions, you can actually put breakpoints on those one-liners, which is great. You can inspect and change. You can do local variables, watch variables, pretty much do anything you want. There's even a little debug console where you can type values in and change values if you'd like to do that. And most of that happens by pressing F5 or by just pressing the green button. So how do we get there? There's a couple options. The first and best option is zero configuration. Who wants all those features without having to do anything? One guy in the back. Awesome. Well, the rest of you can have it too. So yeah, you can get all these options out of the box without doing anything. If you've got a standard node setup, which probably when I go talk to people, about 70 to 80% of them have a pretty standard node setup, the zero config option will work for you. So we'll start there. So what you do is you just automatically attach the node debugger. You tell VS Code, look for node when you're running the inspect protocol. And all you have to do for this is go to settings and you look for auto attach. If you turn on auto attach, the next time you run node from VS Code or from a terminal, it'll look to see, hey, node's running, you've got the inspector protocol, I see your source code, let me crank up the debugger for you, and you're ready to go. And it just works out of the box. It's just like, yeah, I can do that. So it's super easy to do. We'll take a look at how you can do that. We can also debug relative files in our projects. So if you've ever had a database locally on your machine or maybe in a test environment where you need to rerun a test script a lot, like you're editing your app, you're modifying something in there, customers, etc., and then you want to go through and reset the database. I often have a script in my app that really isn't part of the main node part. It's more like in this other folder where I rerun the script. With this feature, you can automatically say to VS Code, whatever file is currently given focus, start the debugger in that file. So you can literally just press the debug button, it'll run whatever file is currently open. That's called relative file debugging. And I'll show you how that works as well. If you use Docker, we can debug Docker. You just have a running container that's using the debugging protocol from Node. And then you just set up your configuration, start debugging, and you're attached to Docker right out of the box. There's some really cool stuff we can do there by looking inside the Docker container, inspecting it, and checking the logs out. You can also do log points. Log points are really cool because a lot of times, especially with Docker, think about your debugging cycle. You create your code, you put it into an image, you run a container. Now you're debugging it and you're setting your breakpoints. You find a mistake and you're like, you know what? I want to go add a console log in there, right? Or I want to go change some values. I want to see what's happening there. And I don't want to constantly keep doing a breakpoint. I just want to go add a console log. What you'd have to do is change your code, rebuild the image, rerun the container, and start again, which can take a minute to 10 minutes depending on what you're doing. It's kind of a pain because it's usually not once, it's usually multiple times. With log points, what you can do is keep the thing running inside the container. You set a log point using VS Code. It adds a console log without changing any of your code. So you can literally change what's going to be output and inspect variables without changing a single line of code. And this is immensely useful when you're using Docker. And of course, you can run it for front-end JavaScript. You can use Angular, which I love. You can do Vue. You can do React. Any of these front-end technologies can also be debugged through VS Code. So it's not just for Node. And in there, you've got all the same features that you would have for the back-end technologies, including your inline breakpoints, which are very important when you've got promises and arrow functions and any other kind of asynchronous activity. So there's a lot you can do. Let's go ahead and check out some of these. And again, if you follow along, you'll find that there's a GitHub repo that I've linked to. And the GitHub repo has a debugging page in there and a README file where you can kind of walk through how you can try all these different kinds of debugging things yourself if you want to try it using this project or your own project later on. So first, let's go in here and we'll close some of these windows. Make sure no node processes are running on my machine. That's good. And here's our project, and our project has a couple things in the folder we're going to take a look at. So let me zoom in a little bit. First, we've got a server folder. In the server folder, we have our routes for Node and Express, and we have some services that are hitting Cosmos DB. And when we go into our services right here, you can see we've got some breakpoints on an asynchronous function that's going to get a list of heroes from the cloud. And then, if we go into the source folder, this project has an Angular application, which in here we've got our villains and heroes, and you can see we've got our components over on the right-hand side. So that's the structure of the application. When I run my app, one of the first things I like to do is look at the package.json. Now, if you're like me, you've got a lot of NPM scripts inside your application. I like to use these for all the commands that take multiple steps for me to run my app. This app has a Node backend and an Angular front end. What I want to do is I want to crank up the Node Web API. It happens to be running on a separate port than the Angular one. So I've got those two things running, which is pretty real world. You're often going to have a backend you're hitting that's not the same as your front end. And then I've got a proxy that points from Angular to Node. So in this case, if we go down and look at the local on line 22, what I'm doing is I'm running Node. I'm telling it to go look in my environment file that's on my machine, so I can point to different databases and servers, and then run my Node server. The debug version of the same command is exactly the same, except it runs the inspector protocol for Node, saying --inspect and running on the default port of 9229. So this is pretty standard stuff for running those kind of applications. And then, if I want to run the Angular app with it, you'll see I have local proxy and local proxy debug. Local proxy debug is the one we're going to run. I'm running concurrently an NPM package that says, hey, go run the npm run debug and run ngserve and proxy it so it can point to the other API. So npm run debug is the same thing we looked at on line 23. A lot of times you'll have npm scripts that point to each other in your app. You don't have to get this complex with it. You can simply just run your Node server if you want to. So you can just type in node inspect 9229 server.js. You can do that too. But I put this in here just to show you can do really anything you want. The key thing here is a lot of real-world apps have environment files. So if you're going to have environment files, you can include these as well. So with that, I mentioned we can automatically debug when we want to. If I hit Command, comma on my machine, I'm going to go into the settings of VS Code, and I'm going to type in here auto attach. And you'll notice the setting right here. Debug node auto attach. And by default, it's not on. It's disabled. So there's disabled, which means it's never going to kick in, and then there's on and off. So you can toggle it back and forth. Once you set this to on, you'll see in the bottom of my screen, not my PowerPoint deck, there it is, auto attach on. And if I want, I can click on this. It moved. There it goes. And I can toggle it on and off, like this. Why would you want to toggle it off? There's been a couple times where I'm like running a Node process and I don't actually want to debug it, and it kicks in. So if sometimes it's a little more aggressive at debugging, like if you're running the protocol and you didn't realize it. So I like to keep it on, and I like to put it down there. Then all I have to do is, remember we had that local proxy debug npm script. So what I'm going to do, and I'm going to turn on a screencast tool built into VS Code. It's going to let you see the commands I'm hitting. So now if I hit Command-Shift-P, you're going to see it on the screen. See down there. So I'm going to hit Command-Shift-P, and I'm going to type in npm run script. I'm going to go choose the one I wanted, local proxy debug, right there, and I hit enter. It's automatically cranking up the debugger. Now first it ran the Node process, which only took a moment, and now it's building Angular for me in my development environment, because it ran both those commands. The debugger is ready and waiting for it to attach if I run a Node process that hits it. Now in my app, I'm going to go over to this Heroes button, because I have a breakpoint on getting heroes that we saw earlier. When I click on heroes, bam, I'm debugging. I did nothing with VS Code other than set one setting to say, yes, automatically attach whenever you see the Node inspector. So once I'm in here, what can you do? Well, you'll see there's a big debugger bar up here. You can continue running, you can step over, step into, step out, rerun, and you can also disconnect with this cool looking disconnect plug icon. And then inside of here, you'll see I've got round circles, and I've got these little diamonds. So the round red circle is a breakpoint. We click in the gutter to set a breakpoint. We can go boom like this or boom like that and get rid of them. We'll take a look at what the diamond means in just a moment. For now, we can see the breakpoint is hit right there. It's highlighting the line it's on, and you'll see a yellow arrow that points to where is the current cursor running. If I hit the next command, you'll see it jumps over it. And as it hit that captain's log, you'll see it at output what we needed to output. And then here, it's on the response status for the heroes. I can inspect by hovering over the heroes. I can click into them right there. I can go over. I can move this bar. I can jump into the block, and I can inspect the heroes over here. And I can look at that hero. If I want to, I can set a watch statement on different properties. So I come back over. I can say take the heroes, double-click it. I'm a little too zoomed in. Let's go debug, add to watch. There's heroes. I can also go down to the debug console if I want to, and I can type something in like heroes 0. And there's the first hero in the array. And I can change values if I want to. So then I can run through by letting it continue, and it ran through the application, and there's the heroes on the screen. So super easy debugging. Didn't have to do anything to do that. If I turn off and I disconnect from the debugger, and now I click auto attach off, which it likes to move to the right, I guess, when I do that. So auto attach is now off. If I run that again, which I'll do down here, we'll kill the whole process. I'll run that same command. This time it's going to run my command, but it's not going to crank up the debugger because I told it not to bother looking anymore. So notice the debugger has not kicked into gear at all. I'll kill that. So again, hit command, comma, go auto attach, like that. Click back in, and we're going to turn it on. And that's all you need to do for automatically attaching to node processes for debugging. Not bad. All right, so the next thing I want to look at is relative files. I mentioned that something I do often is I'll have a folder. In my case, I have this folder called meta. And inside of meta, I've got all these scripts that like run my database resets. So when I use my Cosmos DB, I've got this script here, which runs through. If we just took a quick look at it, you'll see I'm running through this. I've got my heroes and my villains for my app. And then I'm running this command called go, very creative naming. And then I attach to the database, I delete the database, I recreate the database, and I bulk create my heroes and my villains and my other properties in my database. It's just a nice database reset script I run. Well, what if I had a bug in here and I wanted to walk through this and see what's happening? I could set a breakpoint there, and then I can go to the debug window by hitting Command-Shift-D, and you'll see up here I've got these configurations. I'll do that again. I hit this little box, and I've got different configurations here. I'm going to select Launch Relative File. And then I'm going to press this button. When I press Launch Relative File for debugging, it automatically sees what file is currently in focus. And if there's any breakpoints, it'll stop on them. If there's no breakpoints, it'll just run through that. Now I'm inside the debugger on the file that I'm currently open on, and I can run through into all of these, and then I can hover over variables and look at any values that I want to that are inside my project. And then I can let it run through the rest of it and complete. Hopefully it completes. And then disconnect when I'm done. And everything's good. And the way you get to that is up here, there's a little gear file. If I click on that, you'll see that I've got all these launch options in Launch.js. And one of those is Launch Relative File down here on the bottom. And there's recipes up on the VS Code website where you can set these up. This one, I'm setting the command to say, go to the workspace folder. That's wherever you happen to be. The name is just the name that shows up in that drop-down list. And the third part's the important one. The argument in this case is, what am I starting with? I'm starting with whatever file happens to map to this variable that VS Code knows as relative file. That basically means the one that's open right now. So as long as you have that, you can debug any file that happens to be open. So we have some other cool options in here. Notice earlier we said that we could launch automatically by running an npm script. Well, if you didn't want to have auto debugging on, what you could do is you could just say, okay, let me create a configuration that launches any NPM script. And the way you do that is you click this big blue button in the bottom right-hand corner. In case you can't see that, it's right there. We'll click on that. After we click on it, you get this big drop-down list of a bunch of default configurations that are templates you can use for debugging. Notice you got Chrome debugging, Docker debugging, and a bunch of really popular Node type of debugging. One of those is launching via NPM, right here. When you select that one, you're going to get something that looks like this. The type is Node, because we're using Node. The request is launch. We're going to launch a process. The name is what's going to show up in the little drop-down list, and you can change that. The runtime executable is NPM, of course, and the arguments are going to be, what am I doing? I'm saying NPM run debug. So it's going to run that thing called debug in this case. So if I go back to my package.json, let's see what that is. I have debug, which just runs my server. So let's try that. So if I go over to the debug window, I come up and I say launch via NPM, and I hit the green button, it launched the debugger. There's no Angular in this one, it's purely just Node. And then I can go to a tool like Insomnia. If you're not familiar with Insomnia, and it's not zooming in on me, unfortunately, so I'll zoom in. It's a tool kind of like Postman, which allows you to run HTTP requests. It's kind of cool. And we can just run a command like this up here, and if that's the right port, that's not the right port, John. Let's see, is it 7626? Nope, I got the wrong port. Well, if you hit the right port, it would hit the breakpoint in there. So once you do that, it'll hit that breakpoint, and then you can automatically debug into your code on your page. Looks like my process got terminated there. So once you do that, it'll attach in, and you can just hit it and debug it. I like the auto attach because it makes it easy. You don't have to set up the NPM script for the launch, but you can also set up your own. Like if you have multiple NPM scripts, you could set that up. Another option I really like is I have Docker containers, and there's this really cool extension. Let's go back here. Oops, I just killed code. Wrong button. So I have this Docker extension that you can click on this whale over here in VS Code. If you click on that, you can look at all your images that you have running Docker, and you can see any running containers. I have a container called Vikings. And the Vikings container is going to allow you to run my application inside of a Docker container. What it basically does is it takes all the scariness out of Docker for you. So I have this Docker container which basically runs the exact same app you saw me run locally, but in a container. And what I like about this is I can right-click it for debugging it. I can say attach the shell. And it runs the fancy command, which you could memorize if you like, docker exec it, and then that big long number. Hopefully that's your password, right? And then all these other commands. And what that does is it lets you tap into the shell of your application. So let me go ahead and bring that up. And now, for example, I can type in ls. You can see all the files that are in the page, that are inside of the container, sorry. And if we look even further, we could say ls server. And there's all the files inside the server folder. So we're actually inspecting the inside of the container. I can also right-click on this, and I can show the logs. So what this does shows the streaming logs of the application running inside the container. In this case, you'll see I had that captain's log earlier where I was printing out all the heroes that we displayed as we retrieved them. It's showing them right here, so I can actually tap into the logs. Super helpful for debugging inside your containers. So what else could we do? Let's kill those windows. What if we want to debug the code inside the container? Well, if I go back to my debug window, I had this breakpoint inside of my Cosmos DB service here. And remember, I've got these circles and these diamonds, which we're going to get back to, and I want to be able to step through the code. Well, first, let's see if our container is running. If we go up, this thing's actually running on port 7626, and I can see it's running here with my heroes. And there's no heroes. I think I killed my data when I ran it before. So my database script is broken, so let's go back into the database script, and I'm going to rerun this, which you can also do by going to a terminal, saying node meta, I think it's Cosmos SDK, delete my database, create my database. There's all my data. I don't have an any key. Do you guys have an any key on your computer? I've yet to find it. It's called any. That's called a dad joke, by the way. All right, so now I have my data. I should be able to go back and refresh. Whew. All right, I got my data back. So we've got our data in our Docker container. It's running. But if I want to debug that code, how do I do that? Well, remember that launch configuration. Inside this file, I had that big blue button. If I click on that, one of the options was Docker attached to Node. Well, I've already clicked on that, and it created this launch configuration. The port, pretty basic. It's the same debugger port we're going to use. What address? Running on localhost. Now, the next two are the most important. The local root is where is your source code on your machine. It's in the workspace folder. This is a variable saying right where you started this app, it's right where you are. Remote root is where is the code located in the container. Now, if we remember we attached the shell earlier, we saw that was all in user source app if you look at the prompt. So now we know we're mapping a code on our machine where we are to where it is inside the container, and it's using the inspector protocol. So now that we know the Docker container is running, all we have to do is go over to the debug window, select Docker attached node, press run. It should turn purple on the bottom because that's my theme. I've got my debugger window up here. If I go back into my hero service, there's my debug statements. Let's go run the app and let's refresh heroes, and boom. I'm now debugging my Docker container right from VS Code. Super easy to do. And once I'm in there, remember I mentioned that sometimes you're stepping through and you wanted to find out what a value was, but you don't want to change your code because that means I got to rebuild my image, redeploy it, spin up a new container, and do this all over again, which can take 5-10 minutes in some cases. So right here, what I've done is I've right-clicked, and I chose to add a log point. That's what this diamond means. I want to go ahead and print out a certain value when it runs over this line of code. So let's edit what I've done. What I did is I put the words, here is a log point. That's all just string text. And then inside of the curly braces, I put the word heroes. That's the variable that I want to inspect. So I'm saying, go get the heroes, and that's right there. I can hover over it and see what the value is. But let's say I wanted to go get the first hero or the 0th hero. I can just type that in to get the first array element. I hit enter, and it's good. And as long as I have my output open at the bottom, when I run over that line of code, you'll see down there, here's a log point. I didn't have to change any of my code at all in the container. No rebuilding, nothing. No redeployments. And then when I'm done, I can come in here and I can remove the log point. I can add a new one. And I could just go in there and type heroes, and this time we'll put in heroes 1 with no message. This time we'll refresh. We'll let it run. And this time, instead of getting hero slog, I got hero Bjorn. Like that. Super easy to do, and not a lot of effort to get there. Cool. The last demo I wanted to show was running an Angular application. Now this one, if you go back into our launch.json, I've got this other debugger up here, this launch statement, and I named it Launch Angular in Chrome. I point to the URL of the app that I'm running on the client side, localhost 4200, and then I point the web root right to the workspace folder. That's all I have to have in my launch.json. There's one additional thing I need to have with VS Code to make this work, and it's a little extension called the Chrome debugger. So what it's doing, you see this extension up here, it's only got a few downloads, by the way, so you can help us out and download it a little more often. 15 million, I guess. So if you install this Chrome debugger, it'll let you debug Chrome directly from VS Code, so you can walk through and get the same experience in VS Code with your client-side applications. And then this will just attach or launch. You have the option. You can attach an existing process, or you can launch the process and then let the debugger attach to it directly. And that'll get you into Angular. This works for React, works for Vue, any of those. On the links I gave you, I'll give you recipes on how to get that working. But one of the cool parts about that is you can also do inline breakpoints with this. So if I go back to my debug window, and I look inside my code, you got all these breakpoints here. This is an Angular component. Look at line 53. Line 53 is asynchronous and says, go off and get the list of heroes, and when it's done, bring back the heroes, and in this lambda, this arrow function, it's getting the value of heroes and setting them to heroes locally. Normally, if I'd want to set a breakpoint on this line here, because it's embedded into a single line, I'd have to change my code and put curly braces in there instead of breakpoint, or put a debugger line. In the Chrome browser, I can right-click and just do add an inline breakpoint. Well, in VS Code, you can do the same thing. Notice there's a red dot over there. I just right-click on it. I come over here. I zoom out a little so you can see it. Hey, it's not showing up. But you can see there's a red button, so it did work when I did it. That's fun. But it's there and it works. So that's how you add it there. Because I did it here, for example, notice when I add a breakpoint, it's just on the left in the gutter. To get one over on the inside, you have to right-click inside the code and then choose add an inline breakpoint to get there. So once you've got this up and running, it's actually quite easy to do the debugging. The good news in VS Code is there's a couple of extensions out there that you can use. Every time I put this slide up there, I have to change the number. It's probably at 9,000 by now. But you can search for a bunch of things. The one that's showing up there is the debugger for Chrome. Two of my favorite ones are that extension and the Docker extension. Very, very valuable extensions. If you're waiting to get into Docker, by the way, and this isn't a Docker talk, and you don't know all the commands, this is a great way to learn Docker, is to use the VS Code extension for it, because it makes it super easy to try things. So in recap, with debugging, we can automatically attach to any node process running the inspector protocol. We can use relative files to run commands, like to reset the database. We can just launch a server.js or index.js if we want to. We can run npm scripts to debug. We can do debugging inside of Docker containers that you have quite easily without changing code. We can use log points to put console logs. And we can even do inline breakpoints inside of our logic when we have asynchronous and fat arrow commands that we might have. Just remember, with Angular debugging, you need that Chrome debugging extension, otherwise it won't work, because it needs that to be in the tool itself. And once again, here's all the links for everything that we showed today. The demo with the README is what's going to show you all the steps that we did. I encourage you to try this repo, download the repository, try it out yourselves, try it with your own code. And if you walk through the README for the demo, you're going to see there's a debugging.md file inside the repo. If you read that, it's very simple steps on how you can create and use the debugging launch JSON for your own projects as well. So remember, it's not about pressing the button, it's about knowing which button to press. In this case, the big green button up there, which we pressed quite a bit today, in your application. And thanks for coming.